If you've played Deltarune, then I'm sure you can agree that Spamton is a funny little guy. And a pretty popular one too. Italians, on the other hand, like these guys, can also be pretty funny. However, the biggest difference between Spamton and Italians is that Spamton can't jump. So I took it upon myself to change this. I set out to create a Spamton-themed platformer in Godot. So, there were a few problems I had to address first. For one, I had never actually made a platformer, and two, I had little experience with Godot. And lastly, I had to make sure that this was something I stuck through till the end. I don't mean to brag or anything, but I do consider myself to be a bit of a gamer.
See if I still have my Touhou abilities. What the fuck?
I play a lot of games, but I have a tendency to get distracted in the middle of a game and switch over to another. This is, well, an awful habit, and game developers are notorious for giving up in the middle of their projects. So to make sure that I don't fall into the same trap, I promised a friend I'd make them this short game for their birthday, making me legally accountable to make that game for them, or suffer social disappointment. With all that backstory being put in place, I think it's about time we start working on the actual game itself. So, let's, jump right into it. No, I didn't make that joke. The very first thing I did was take one of Spamton's sprites from Deltarune and use that as a reference for all of my other animations. I then ported my art into Godot as a sprite sheet, and then began to work on a character controller. I gave Spamton some simple moves. He had walking, he had running, he had squatting for some reason, and that's never explained. He had jumping, and he had a little idle animation that played if you didn't move for like 3 seconds. All of this played out based on what buttons you pressed. Pretty simple stuff, but what I learned that was new to me was using an animation tree to make alternate versions of each animation depending on whether you used the right stick or the left stick, or pressed on the right key or on the left key. You get what I mean. Whether he'd be going left or whether he'd be going right would automatically just be blended into each animation, and that's pretty cool to me, who's an idiot who doesn't know what I'm doing. I then learned how to create a 2D pixel tile set, in which I'd use specific blocks to sort of build out each level. Which was great, because that made it easy to make different variations for different levels, as well as define what was a hazard and what wasn't. Speaking of hazards, I then had to make Spamton die. And so I killed him. But I like that guy, so I made a revival mechanic. He's okay now, and it's all starting to come along pretty smoothly.
Oh my god! Wow!
Now, this is all very cool. We've got a guy who can move, who can jump, and he can do all that jazz, but what else are we missing? Sound effects, background art, user interface, enemies, level design, more hazards, lighting, particle effects, actual levels, a way to track progression, music. Well, I actually won't make the music this time. When you try to break down everything you have to do in a game, it can feel like a lot, so it's important to know what to do first. But there is a pretty easy solution. I need to keep calm and tackle all of these problems one by one, in one in-game space. This is usually called a gym, where we can play around with a whole bunch of different mechanics and test them all there. In my case, I created an area to be used as a tutorial, where I blocked out a linear path using the tile set I'd already created. The game is set in the SAQ, which, for those who do not live in Montreal, is a alcohol boutique. Don't ask why he's there, he's a Spamton's an SAQ salesman. That's just. I added a few pillars to show the player how to jump, as well as an area where you can take damage or die. Following this, I wanted to tackle the background, so I used some bricks as a basic background layer, as well as drew some giant alcohol bottles as silhouettes, which I had scroll at a different speed as the bricks to create a parallax effect, which is commonly seen in a lot of platformers when two background layers move at different speeds to simulate distance. After adding some lighting, as well as some garbage can decor, things started to feel more alive. Well, at least more than this. But what do we do in this game? Well, I decided to create a form of currency. Kind of like Mario's titular coin. It's not titular. Why did I say that? This is called Chromer, which is Spamton's favorite currency from Deltarune. I don't think Chromer had an actual design in Deltarune, but this is mine. I gave it an animation for when it's idly floating in the air, as well as when Spamton's body collides with it. I decided that each level section would have a certain number of Chromer coins to be collected. And so, to show this, my next step was to create a user interface. And luckily, I already had a vague idea of what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted each level to be split up by around 5 or so checkpoints. So to show this in the UI, I created a white bar with 5 dots, and every time you'd advance from one level checkpoint to the next dot would be highlighted. Pretty simple, but I think it worked pretty well. I added a coin counter to the top left of the screen, as well as a heart counter to track how many hits Spamton can take before he could die. And with all that in place, this was a fine tutorial. I then had to start making the first few levels. And so the first level segment was about making sure that the player can get used to Spamton's movement, having some basic platforming to avoid the green goop, which is meant to be alcohol, by the way. Everything green is alcohol, just keep that in mind. I like alcohol, but Spamton really doesn't. In the following level segment, I introduced these new alcoholic bottles that spewed a projectile of alcohol every once in a while. And so Spamton had to learn to time his jumps, as well as climb vertically. It's really simple when it comes to platformer stuff, but as my first platformer, I wanted to stick simple, for the most part. And to finish off the first main level, I added a rising green fire, forcing the player to climb the level as fast as they can, all the while collecting the coins if they're able to. When it comes to the Chromer coins, I decided to place them in spots that make the level actively harder to escape, which can certainly escalate the difficulty for those who plan to go for them. Once you're through with all of that, you end up in this dark, strange room and are met with a rotating 3D object, which was actually kind of technically complex to have fit into this 2D scene. The object isn't actually here. I had to use a viewport, which in a sense is a camera that looks into a different 3D scene and basically projects this 3D object almost as if it were a video with a transparent background. Narratively, you'll discover a new 3D object at the end of each level, and you'll also be shown the number of Chromer coins you've collected. Now this is almost starting to look like a real game. Even if simple, the game is gaming, and I like to game. But how can the game become even more of a game? To answer that question, we need to find a way to track progression. Now imagine a Mario game, a 2D Mario game, if you've ever played one. If every level transitioned directly into the next level without any overworld to connect them, it'd feel a little bit odd, especially when the theming started to change. That's the sense of progression that we're missing here. And so to complete this, my solution was to create a sort of hub area, basically Spamton's SAQ office. This is where he works. He's got pots he can break, he's got a garbage can that's, there, and he's got a light switch that he can play with, for some reason. So that's everything you need in an office, I think. But most importantly, there are doorways here, and each door leads into the next level. To create a sense of progression, whenever you complete a level, it shows how many Chromer coins you've collected, as well as how many times you've died. That way I can see who's a gamer and who isn't. But there's a problem. I wanted to make sure players didn't have to play through the whole game in one sitting, and right now there's no save system. So I took all the values that are tracked through the levels, and I added them into a script that basically stores them in a file on your computer. This is not malware. I promise, please download the game. And with that, your saves are actually tracked between playthroughs. Then I wanted to make sure there's a way to delete your saves. So I took the trash can in Spamton's office, and I used that as a The more I thought about continuing, the more I realize that there's not really much purpose in talking more about the development when you guys can just go play the game yourself. I wanted to make sure I didn't really give away anything other than the first out of 5 levels. You can find the game for free on itch.io. Check out Rooster Syndicate, that's me, that's my name. Not my real name, but that's my username. And check out Spam Quest, the extra dimension. Yeah, I know it's a bad title, I don't give a